This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome, folks. Here we are. Dr. Charles Parker here one more time. We've got an exciting interview today, and this is going to take us all kinds of different places that are so productive and so tight with the how. We talk about why, we talk about what, but we're going to talk a little bit of why and what, but we're going to get down to how with our guest today, Steve Campbell, MSIS, Masters of Science in Information Systems Technology. Steve, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be so much fun.
It is going to be fun. And so what we're going to do, first of all, I'm going to do a brief intro, and then we'll hear a little bit about you, where you are, and we'll go on down the road with our very interesting conversation. So Steve is the author of Making Your Mind Magnificent, Flourishing at Any Age. He's been exploring and teaching the discoveries of cognitive psychology in various universities and colleges for over 25 years. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in zoology and a Master's in Information Systems from the University of San Francisco. Stephen now conducts seminars on the discoveries regarding what cognitive psychology is made about understanding, get this, folks, how we think and how we can change what we think about in ourselves, our relationships, and the world itself. Steve is also the radio host of Your Amazing Mind on KOWS in Sonoma County. Doggone it, I'd like to be out there with him. Every Wednesday morning from 9 to 11 Pacific time. So we're really pleased to have you on board here, Steve. It's going to be very interesting because there's so many different things that are so relevant. You know, one of the things I got into this next phase of where I am personally is the concept with ADHD, which is the gateway to understanding what we don't know, is the fact that we're treating thinking without thinking about thinking. I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Yes, I like that.
So,
that sounds...
moving smartly along, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are now, what your interests are, and where we should go next.
I'm a retired professor. As you said, my background is in computers, but my passion is how we think. And I've been studying that over the last 25 years or so. At the last college where I taught, I found myself teaching a course called Career Transitions, which we taught students how to study and how to take tests, etc. It was for beginning students. The president noticed that when I taught my class for beginning students, the students would drop out. The retention was like 93%, which is outstandingly high for a college. And so I taught that, and my wife sat me down in 2008. She said, okay, honey. And then I was also the evening dean, so my wife sat me down, and she said, okay, we need to talk about this. Your dad died at 62. You're 61, working 14 hours a day. If you die early, I'll kill you. Which I didn't want to happen. So I retired in 2008, but this message is so wonderful, I just began going down to senior centers and sharing it there. And people began asking me to share at their hospitals, at their drug places, at their weight loss places, at their businesses. And before I knew it, over the next 9 years now I've been doing this, I've spoken to over 32,000 people, which just blows me away. And the mission is the mission or the message that I share is so easy. And it's simply this, Chuck, that while I'm talking to you right now, and while I'm talking to your listeners are talking to themselves thousands of times faster. Now, how can your brain do that? Well, when I talk to you, I use words. And when you talk to yourself, you also use words. But Chuck, when you talk to yourself, mainly you use pictures and feelings. So when I think of Mary, my wife, I don't think of her with words. I think of how I feel about her, and I think of how pretty she's become to me in the 45 years we've been married. So we're really talking to ourselves far faster than I'm talking to you right now. But here's the important point, and this is my message, all in one sentence. While you're talking to yourself, your brain is believing everything you tell it, without question. Ew. So when we say, oh, I'm so stupid for doing this, you know what our brain says? Our brain says, okay, And then it makes sure that you're stupid. Let's say it a different way. When you say, I cannot do this, the brain says, okay, and then make sure you can't. That's the scary part. Now, there's a wonderful part. Here's the wonderful part. When you say, I can do this, what does your brain say to that? Okay. And then it becomes obsessed with finding ways of doing that. Now, here's the most exciting part of all. People then ask, well, what if you're saying it's not true? Did you know your brain doesn't even care? Your brain doesn't even ask that question. When I heard that in a psychology class years ago, I was really skeptical. I think one of the best books that I've ever read on that is called Phantoms in the Brain, written by Dr. V.S. Ramachandran out of UC San Diego. Phantoms refer to phantom limbs that have been amputated, Chuck. Mm-hmm. And a patient goes into a doctor's office, he'll say, got to help me. I can't do a thing with my arm. It's driving me crazy. And the doctor may have to say, well, that could be because I amputated that arm 6 months ago. And the patient says, you didn't tell my brain that. My brain doesn't know it's gone. Mm-hmm. My brain thinks it's there, and my brain wants to pick things up with it, and it's driving me absolutely nuts. So the brain doesn't care whether what you're saying is true or not. So then what I do is I go to the work of Dr. Albert Ellis, who was one of the founders of cognitive psychology, who wrote a little book called A Guide to Rational Living back in 1961. Here's what he suggested, and we now know this is true through decades of research all over the world. Everything we can do today is primarily based on what we say to ourselves about ourselves today. Notice I'm emphasizing the word today, Chuck.
Yes.
When this was suggested back in the early 60s, psychology had a conniption fit. They said, no, you're wrong. The way you are today is because of your childhood and unresolved childhood conflicts. Okay, that was Freudianism. That was followed by behaviorism. Harvard University, Dr. B.F. Skinner, he said, no, the way you are today, it's all cause and effect. That was followed by it's on your genes. That didn't last too long. That was followed by environmentalism. It's in your environment, your culture, your birth order, your mom, your dad. And Dr. Ellis came back and he said, you know what? They're all true. Wait a minute. How could they all be true? Because when you say it, Chuck, your brain's job is to make it true. Can I share with you a story that sort of illustrates this?
Please.
For the first 42 years of my life, I said to myself, I'm really dumb at math. I won't go into details as to why that's all in my book, but I was convinced I was stupid in math. And guess what? I was stupid in math. But I love computers, so back in the 80s, I began fiddling around with computers, and this is way before the IBM in 81, and so I got a graduate degree in computer science, began teaching computer courses. And one day the dean came to my office. He said, one of our math professors just quit, so you are our new math professor next semester. I freaked out. I said, no, I can't do numbers. He said, you want a job? You better learn because you're teaching math next semester. Now, this is back in the 80s, way before the internet. So I ran down to the library, the Rohnert Park Library in Northern California, and picked up all the books I could on brain-based learning. That's how this whole thing started decades ago. And I began teaching my course based on how the brain learns. And students began saying to themselves, oh, you're such a good math teacher. And then the dean said, you're causing a problem here, Mr. Campbell, because all the students are saying, I will only take math if Mr. Campbell's my professor. And I began hearing all these comments, and eventually I began agreeing with them. And eventually I began saying to myself, gosh, Steve, if you're so good with computers, you got to be smart with math. And you know what my brain said? Okay. And here's the exciting part. I began locking onto that new message. That doesn't mean I said it over and over and over. It simply means it became a predominant thought and message in my life. And here's the exciting part. My brain began to rewire itself. This is called neuroplasticity, coined by Dr. Eric Kandel, who wrote In Search of Memory back in 2002, got a Nobel Prize for his work. And what we now know is that when you lock on to new messages, those new messages not only become a part of the way you think, ready? Hang on to your seat. They become a part of who you are. And I became really smart with math, and I ended up writing 2 college textbooks on computer software and, what do you think? Math. Was it magical? No. It's simply switching what I was saying to myself about myself, and my brain said, okay. So let's go back to Dr. Ellis, and this is the message that I get chills when I share with people. If everything we can do today is primarily based on what we say to ourselves about ourselves today, we can change what we are saying to ourselves about ourselves when, Chuck?
Now. Today.
Now. And what does our brain say? Okay. Is it true? Don't care. All I care is what you tell me. Wow.
Very important point. That is an outstandingly important point, because then you suspend the previous prescriptions that they're gone.
That's right.
They just vaporize like dandelion seed.
That's right. Because that's what you lock onto. And the brain locks on. And then let's take this a step farther. Let's go into the feelings also, because I'll tell you, Chuck, and I think you know this already, we're not thinking people who feel, we're feeling people who think. Our feelings about ourselves do not primarily come from how we were raised, what we've done, events in our lives, or what we're doing. You know where they come from? Again, they come from our beliefs about how we were raised and what we've done and what we're doing and events in our lives. And we can change those beliefs. Let me give you an illustration that this is really the best way to explain this. Let's imagine that you and I have been friends for years and years and years, and one day I show up at your front door with a shovel. I say, hi, Chuck. Hi, Steve. How are you? Good to see you. Chuck, I want to dig a hole in your backyard. You say, okay, that's weird, but I go to your backyard. I start digging the hole, and you're watching me dig the hole. And you begin to develop some beliefs. Let me see. We've been friends for years. Our kids have played together. He knows it's my birthday today. Oh, Steve also knows that I love trees. Oh, Steve, that's what you're doing. You're planting a tree in my backyard for my birthday. Oh, you're just the sweetest guy. Call Mary, get her over here. We'll have pizza tonight. We'll watch a movie. I love you, Steve. Thank you so much. So that's one scenario. Here's the other scenario. You and I hate each other. Hate each other. And I show up at your front door with a shovel. I say, hi, Chuck. Hi, Steve. I'm going to dig a hole in your backyard. So go to your backyard and start digging the hole. Now, this time, your beliefs are completely different. Your beliefs are that I'm digging the hole to bury you in it. Mm-hmm. Now, watch this, Chuck. Same Chuck, same Steve, same Saturday morning, same front yard, same backyard, same shovel, same hole. Completely different beliefs, completely different feelings. Our feelings come from our beliefs. That's why you've met people who have been raised in situations that were horrific, and yet look at what they've done with their lives. Amazing. You've also met people who have been raised in situations to die for, and some of them wish they could. What's the difference? It wasn't the situations. It was their beliefs about the situations. Wow.
Very, very interesting. No question about it. It takes it to a completely different level of conversation and proactive. It is the how. This is where we are right here in a very short period of time. We went from why, we had a little background, to what's actually going on, to how you can actually make significant changes in your life.
And here's what people say to me. They say, well, Steve, you know what? I'm 85 years old. I'm 75. I've always been this way. I can't really change. My brain is sort of stuck, etc. Let me share with you how much our brain is really, quote, stuck, unquote. Let's imagine that you're 3 years old. We'll use my daughter Sarah as an example. Let's just imagine Sarah. She's 3 years old. This is 33 years ago. And Mary said to me, we got to teach Sarah about the city. because she was raised in Rohnert Park. The closest thing to Rohnert Park to a city is the Raleigh Shopping Center. So there's absolutely nothing there. So let me share with you how we learn. I read her a book, and here's what the brain does. I read her a book, and picture Sarah's brain as sort of a blank slate. There's nothing there about the city. So we have a blank brain, and I read her a book. Now picture a small circle that appears that says book right in the middle of it. So you have a big circle indicating your brain and a small circle indicating the book that I read to her. I read her another book, the brain records that, so draw another circle with the word book in it. Then we introduce some friends in San Francisco and Oakland, so draw 2 more circles that says friends. Then draw a circle with building on it, so we show her some buildings, some parks, some lights. So you have this big circle with little circles inside. Those circles represent what are called neural clusters. Neural clusters are little clusters of neuron that occur in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is just under your forehead. So now Sarah's recording all of this stuff. So it has all these little circles inside her brain. When she goes to sleep that night, here's what her brain does. Her brain, first of all, says, great, leave me alone. Because now what I need to do is I need to make sense out of all the stuff that you gave me. So it looks at all those little circles and tries to find relationships. So here's a book about a city. Here's another book about a city. They both have got people and lights and cars. There's no connection there. There should be. So the brain creates a connection between those 2 clusters of neurons. The connection involves axons, dendrites, synaptic clefts, etc. The brain creates another connection and another. And now what you're doing is you're watching the brain draw lines between all those circles. That's what the brain's doing. It's learning. That's what your brain does when you go to sleep. It learns. It creates all those connections. Now, here's the question. How many connections can your brain carry? Let me ask that a different way, Chuck. How much can you still learn and grow and change? Not based on how old you are, but how much can your brain learn and change? So let's talk about that. Your ability to learn is based on those connections. So we're going to determine how many connections the human brain can carry. That will give you an idea of how much you can still learn and grow. The connections are based on the number of brain cells you have, white neurons, okay? The latest study I've seen has got about 100 billion. So you got about 100 billion brain cells in your brain. Each of those cells are connected to an average of 10,000 other cells. Now, that's not a multiple, that's a power, Chuck.
Yeah.
So the number of connections that your brain can carry, ready? Here we go, is 100 billion to the power of 10,000. You know what that is? That's 100 billion times 100 billion times 100 billion, 10,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Anakin was one of Russia's top neuroscientists. He was a student of Ivan Pavlov. You remember Pavlov?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He wanted to know, this is in the early 70s, he wanted to know how do you write that number out in longhand? And back in the early 70s, late 60s, they thought there were about 30 billion brain cells, if you've read literature, which I have. So 30 billion to the power of 10,000, how do you write that out in longhand? So he used a computer, and he came up with 30 billion is, you start with the number 1, you follow up by 6.5 million miles of zeros.
Mm.
Dr. Ramachandran says on page 8 of his book, A Guide to Rational Living, that neuromathematicians, he's from UCSD, I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently there are, neuromathematicians have concluded that the number of schemas and patterns and connections which a human brain can carry exceeds the number of elementary particles in the universe. What's the point?
Mm.
There is absolutely no limit to how much we can grow. But you know what? That's not really true, because there is a limit. Here's the limit. Chuck, the primary thing that holds us back from learning and growing and changing is what we say to ourselves. That's it. The primary element that holds us back is simply our self-talk. Why is that so exciting? Because you can change that self-talk any time you want to. Wow again.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so then let me ask you this question. Take a breath for a second. This is really very interesting, and in a way I don't want to interrupt you, but I want you to get your breath. The issue is for our audience, and I'm bringing myself into it too, because then the next question, and by the way, I have to tell you, I've always been interested in Ramachandran, so that I had no idea that you were interested in him.
Oh, I love him. He's one of my heroes, yeah.
So long ago I said, oh my gosh, this guy is totally fantastic. Yeah. So, but the next level is, how does what you're talking about fit into some of the therapy techniques? So, for example, like dialectic behavioral therapy, and some of those. Do you have a name for what you do, so myself and our audience can kind of wrap our brain around it a little more in terms of application?
Well, I don't really. The closest name I can think of is cognitive psychology, based on the work of Dr. Albert Ellis, and his book A Guide to Rational Living is a really, really excellent book that talks about that. Mm-hmm. When I do one-on-one coaching, and I'm not a psychologist, and so I can't call it, therapy, but when I do one-on-one coaching, we emphasize the present. We emphasize what's happening today and how we can change that today. I mean, we talk about the past and where the person came from and, how he was grown. But the main thing we talk about is, how are you thinking today? Because that's what your brain's listening to. Let me see if I can think of a better way to think of it. Let me give you another illustration. When my father died, he was very young. This is 30 years ago. And Mary said to me, if you die early, I'll kill you. Again, I don't want to be a widow for 40 years, and I was about 40 pounds more than I weigh now. So I said, okay, I need to lose this weight. So I'd get up and run and swim, and I would lose maybe 3 or 4 pounds a week, and then I gained it all back in the weekend. I did that for 25 years. Gained all the weight back. Never couldn't lose the weight. Here's the reason I could not lose the weight, Chuck, because I remember this so clearly. I look in the mirror, and I say to myself, you are a 240-pound man who's got to lose 40 pounds. When I said that, Chuck, what did my brain say?
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear this part, but then it said, my job is to keep you at 240 pounds, because that's how you see yourself. And after 25 years of this, I said, well, this is not good. This isn't going to work. So I began reading all this stuff. I realized I was giving myself the wrong message. So in my work, I use what is called an affirmation. And an affirmation is not magical. It's not new age. It's simply a statement that, when written correctly, triggers a picture in your mind of a goal that has already been accomplished. So let's go back. So I create an affirmation. I'm just going to paraphrase because I don't remember what it was, but it's something like, gosh, you look great at 200 pounds. You're so thin. You look fantastic. I'm really proud of you. You're just, good job, Steve. Well, when I first said that, my brain sort of peeked up and said, hello, excuse me, reality check here. Look at the scale. Look at the mirror. You're not 240 pounds. You're not 200 pounds. You're 240. And I said, no, that's how I see myself now. I see myself at 200, and I'm locking onto that. Well, then my brain said, well, now we've got a problem, because there's a gap between what you are and what you're seeing. The gap is at about 40 pounds. Now we get into what is called Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology is based on the premise that our brain hates gaps, hates them. And it always got to close the gap. So I said, I'm 200 pounds. My brain said, you're 240. And I said, no, that's what I'm locking onto. Now, here's what's so exciting. When that message became stronger and stronger and stronger, we've already learned the brain believes what I tell it, whether it's true or not. When my brain saw that I was really serious, the brain says, well, now we got to figure out a way to lose that 40 pounds like today, like now. And over a year I did. Now, here's another reason why I couldn't lose the weight, and this is what most of us do. I also said to myself, you will lose 40 pounds. You know what my brain said to that? Great. Good luck. I'm going to go take a nap. Because number one, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. And number two, I'm so busy dealing with the present that I don't really care about the future. So you put your goals in the future out there somewhere, and I don't have to do a thing. So I put all of my goals in the present tense. I'm already there. And then my brain said, well, now we got a problem. We got to get you there like tomorrow. Now, all of this leads to one important point, and this is so exciting. I'll say it quietly and slowly. Chuck, there is still a self-image in my brain of a 240-pound person. It's still there. How do you know, Steve? Because I've never had a lobotomy. I know it's still there. But here's the point. I haven't seen it for years because that's not what I lock onto. Let me give you a wonderful illustration of what an affirmation really is. When I was a little boy, my dad taught me how to ride a bicycle. And he took me out to this road and took the training wheels off, and he said to me, now, son, before I give you a little shove, you see that rock on the road about 50 feet out there? Yes, Daddy. Don't run into that rock. And you already know what happened.
Yep.
I got down on my bike. I locked onto the rock so I would not run into it. What happened, Chuck?
Yeah, ran into it.
Bam. Bam, right into the rock. That rock is the perfect illustration of an affirmation. It's what you lock onto. It's what your brain locks onto. And your brain makes it happen. It's got to start up in the way you think. For years and years and years, I worked with Dr. Jennifer Huber right here in Santa Rosa in her practice called MedLight. And she would work with grossly obese people. In fact, she still has a very, very valuable practice here in Santa Rosa. These people were very grossly obese. And years and years ago, she heard what I was doing. So we sat down. She said, here's my challenge, Steve. I have these patients, and I come in, and they come in, and we do the liposuction, and we do, the drinks and the malts and the diets, and they lose the weight. Then as soon as they leave the practice, they gain all the weight back. The reason is because they never changed how they saw themselves up in their brain. They never saw themselves at 120, 140, 160. Mm-hmm. They just saw themselves on a diet. Let me give you another illustration. Marion, my wife, smoked for the first 10 years of our marriage. She would say every January 1st, this is the year, honey, this is the year, this is the year. She would not smoke for a week and a month, and she'd go back to smoking. The reason she couldn't quit is because she never changed how she saw herself up in her brain. She never saw herself as a non-smoker. So she would quit smoking, and after a week, 2 weeks, the brain would say, why are you a smoker not smoking? And she did. Then one summer, after our 10th year of marriage, she flew home to watch her father die of emphysema. And I picked her up at SFO, the airport. She looked at me and she said, you are looking at a non-smoker. And she hasn't smoked since. What I do and what my book does is it helps people change how they see themselves without having to watch their father die of lung cancer. And what's so exciting is that the longer and the stronger that message becomes, just like the rock in the road, the more the people change. Wow.
See, that is fantastic. Now, let me take a moment to tell our audience, I don't know that in the introduction I gave the name of the book. It's going to be in the show notes, but Making Your Mind Magnificent, Flourishing at Any Age is the name of the book, my friends. And, you're saying some such interesting things. I I want to ask you another quick question because it's such a pleasure having a guy like you on because I can learn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But the next question that I have, because I've done a lot of meditation over the years and did guided imagery and, some of these things are true. Let me ask you this. Is it your experience that a meditative experience with an affirmative vision is more powerful than an affirmation without the meditative experience?
I think that the meditation really helps because the meditation makes that picture stronger. It makes that picture more apparent, more real in your life. People create an affirmation and oftentimes it doesn't work. And what they say to me is, well, Steve, I don't understand because I kept saying it over and over and over and over and over. Let me try to illustrate why it doesn't work that way. Picture a brain. You're looking at a brain from the top down, okay? The brain is divided into two sections, the left side and the right side. We call it hemispheres. Left hemisphere, right hemisphere. The bridge that separates them is called the corpus callosum, okay? We've known for centuries that there's a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. It's only since the work of Dr. I forgot his name, early 70s. I can't remember his name. But anyway, he got a Nobel Prize for his split brain experiments. It'll come back. Anyway, he discovered that our left and our right side process information very differently. Our left side is very logical. It's very mathematical. It's where the affirmations and anything we learn eventually first start. They start on the left side. Okay, so it's logical. So when I learn something, it starts on the left side. Okay, it has to go over to the right side, which is where our feelings are, our desires, our creativity. It has to get from the left to the right. When you create an affirmation, it starts on the left. When you repeat the affirmation, that's all you do. It never gets over to the right. It stays on the left side. Can you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It never gets to where you are, where you're really feeling. That's why affirmations have to become a really, really strong picture. So let me show you. Let me give you a how. Let's go back to my losing the weight. So I wrote an affirmation. I look great. I'm only 200 pounds. I'm fantastic. And my brain, when it saw that I was really serious, you know what the first thing it wanted to do? It wanted to give up. No, this isn't going to work. I don't like change. What we need to realize, Chuck, is that the brain doesn't want you to change. The brain hates changes. Because what if it doesn't work? And change is risky. And I don't like to change. And so the brain doesn't love to change. It doesn't like to change. It doesn't want you to lose that weight. Doesn't want you to return that relationship. Doesn't want you to get off that drug. Doesn't want you to make that money because it's different. It's called self-images, okay? So what we need to do is to lock on to those changes and create a brand new self-image. The brain hates change, but it loves to create things. And so rather than change how I was seeing myself in terms of my weight, I simply created a brand new self-image. It became part of me, and it became a predominant part of me. Let's talk about self-images just for a little bit. I was a first-year baby boomer, born in 47. So I was taught that you have a self-image. That's only partially true, Chuck. You don't have one self-image. You've got millions of them. You have a self-image for every single thing that you do. You have a self-image for how you see yourself as a radio host, how you see yourself as a father, how you see yourself as a grandfather, how you see yourself as a cook, how you see yourself as a dancer, and on and on and on and on and on. I say I have a self-image for every meal that I cook. So I cook really good scrambled eggs and really horrible poached eggs. What's the point? Well, I have a very high self-image for my scrambled and a really low one for my poached. If I have two self-images for just two meals that I cook, you can imagine how many thousands of self-images I must have. Now, where did those self-images come from? They're learned, Chuck. You weren't born with them. Now, you were born with certain natural dispositions. I was born a teacher. I've always been a teacher. When I was a kid, I used to put rocks in my backyard pretending I was teaching them. I was a really weird kid. But I love teaching. So we were born with certain natural dispositions, certain natural gifts, but our self-images are learned. How do we learn them? And here's where it gets exciting again. Your self-images are based on your self-talk. Mm-hmm. Your self-images are based on what you say to yourself about yourself today. Now, there's a couple of inferences that we need to talk about. Since that's true, number one, you cannot remove your self-images. You can't get rid of them unless you're willing to have a lobotomy, okay? They're hardwired into your brain. So that self-image of a 240-pound person is still there because I've never had a lobotomy. Number two, your self-images are really, 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 really hard to change because they're based on your self-talk. And according to Shad Helmstedter's wonderful book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself, most of what we talk to ourselves, most of what we say to ourselves is negative stuff. I'll just say more than 50%, but most of what we say to ourselves is negative stuff. So your self-images are really hard to get. You can't get rid of them. They're really hard to change. So what we do is we create brand new ones. And the old ones are still there, but the new ones become more and more and more prominent. And then neuroplasticity kicks in, and those new self-images become a part of who you are. Wow. Does that help a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I think that just traveling down that trail with you is so helpful to so many listeners who are thinking about this for a moment, because of all the people that I've talked to, we've done over 100 interviews.
Yeah.
Yours is so much more proactive in a constructive sense in terms of, I mean, that's not saying anything negative about anybody. It's saying something creative about you. I mean, it's the same
I just say it differently. Yeah.
You just say it differently. And I think what happens is you give a personal way for a person to actually work within themselves every day. They have to, and it's a positive instead of a negative. Mm-hmm. It's like, here's where I'm going, and it's a creative positive. It's not like working on the negative and grinding yourself into a thin paste with what you're going to do to reframe the negative or your childhood experience or whatever. You say, look, this is what it's going to be today, and if it's going to be this way today, it's highly likely that it's increasingly possible it's going to be there tomorrow.
That's right. Let me tell you another story. I ended up teaching math at USF. And a student came to my office. She was very, very, very shy. I'll never forget this. She sat down across my desk and she said, Mr. Campbell, first of all, I'm so glad you're my professor in math because I am a C student in math. I said, what do you mean, Sue? She said, I've never gotten above a C in my math courses. So I just needed to warn you that I'm going to get a C in math. I said, well, Sue, I used to be that way, so let's work together. So I worked with her, and she got an A in the first midterm. I was so excited. I gave it to her personally. I said, there's your A, Sue. And I'll tell you, Chuck, she looked at it, and she freaked out.
Oh, my God.
And then she looked up at me, and she said, oh, Mr. Campbell, this is a mistake. I said, what do you mean, Sue? She said, I have never gotten above a C in a math test. You must have made a mistake. I said, well, I didn't, Sue. This is a genuine A. So then she looked at it longer, and I will never forget this. She looked up at me, and a big smile creased over her face, and she said, do you know what this means, Mr. Campbell? And, of course, I sat down next to her. I said, of course I do, Sue, but you tell me, what does this mean? What does this mean? She said, this means, Mr. Campbell, that when I flunk my next test, I can still maintain my C.
Oh, God.
I said, Sue, just get an A in every test. She said, oh, I can't. Why? What was her answer, Chuck? I'm a C student. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened, by the way. She flunked the next test. She got a C in the course. Now, I sat down with her. I sat right down next to her, and I said, Sue, answer me this. What would have happened if you had flunked this test? Do you know what she said? without a moment's hesitation, Chuck, what do you think she said?
I don't know.
She said, I'd have to get an A on the next test to maintain my C. I'd have to.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Sue, just get an A in every test. She said, oh, I can't. Why? Because I'm a C student. I'm too old. I've always been this way. I'm stuck. I can't repair that relationship. I can't make up for what I've done. This is the way it is. Or, do you know when your old life ended, Chuck?
Mm-hmm.
It ended 1 second ago. 1 second ago. Bing, gone.
Mm-hmm.
Which means you know when your new life began? It began 1 second ago. Now do the math. 60 seconds per minute, 60 minutes per hour, 24 hours per day. That means that in one 24-hour period, you have 86,400 new opportunities for a new life every single day.
Mm.
All you have to do is take them. Now, people have said to me, oh, that's just a crazy way to think, and I don't like that, and it's not going to work for me. And unfortunately, when they say that, what does their brain say? Okay, you're right, It is. But some people have said, whoa, that's really neat. I like that. And when they said that, what did their brain say? Yeah, it really is. And they began looking for ways to make it real in their lives. It all comes down to the way we think. And you know what? That's scary and wonderful. For years and years and years, I did these classes for the Sonoma County Drug Abuse Alternative Center. It was a residential area which is still around for about 80 drug addicts. And the scary part about this message is that they really can't blame, or they can't say, well, this happened because of this or that. It really comes down to the way they think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they began changing. Let me tell you about Rick. Rick was a very, very, very big, scary-looking dude. And he came up to me. This is years ago. He was very, very big and huge. And he came up to me, and he was really angry after one of my classes. And I won't use the language that he used because you'd have to take me off the air. So I'll paraphrase it out. But he said, Mr. Campbell, I'm really angry at you. And he said, why is that, Rick? He said, because all of this is baloney. All of this is baloney. I've been to San Quentin. I've been to Folsom. I've been through all the prisons. I've been through all the programs. None of this works for me. I'm dyslexic, which means I can't read. I've been raised in a drug culture. I was abused in ways that you wouldn't believe. And so none of this will work. None of this will work. I said, well, let me show you a slide, Rick. So I use PowerPoint slides. So I used a PowerPoint slide. And on the slide were simply names. Whoopi Goldberg, Tom Cruise, Jay Leno, Alexander Graham Bell was dyslexic. Leonardo da Vinci was dyslexic. Albert Einstein was dyslexic. Let's see who else. A lot of other people. I said to Rick, Rick, all of these people are at the same place you are. But at some point in their life, they said to themselves, even though it's harder, and even though I have to do it my own way, and even though there's a lot of other stuff I don't understand about myself, I can still do this. I can still do that. I can still do this. And when they did, what did their brain say? Okay. Mm-hmm. And then I looked up at Rick, and I said, Rick, when you say this program will not work for you, you're absolutely correct. It won't. But here's the reason it won't. Because that's what you're saying. I'll never forget this, Chuck. I swear I saw tears in eyes, or maybe I'm just imagining it. But he looked at me very softly, and he said, you mean it's really up to me? I said, yeah, it really is, Rick. Months later, I saw him. He went through the program. Months later, I was putting food in my truck at Safeway. He came bursting out of the Safeway doors, ran right to me. This guy must have been 350 pounds. So I said, oh, my God, he's found me. He's going to kill me. I'm dead. He picked me up. I'm 200 pounds. Picked me up, put me down, thank goodness. He said, you know what I'm doing, Mr. Campbell? I said, what are you doing, Rick? And he said, I went through the program. I didn't tell you this part, Mr. Campbell, but I love numbers. I can't read, but I love numbers. So I love Excel. I love the columns and the rows, and I just love numbers. So I got hired for Safeway at their graveyard shift to help them take care of the fruits and the vegetables. And I saw them throwing all these fruits and vegetables out. It drove me nuts. So using my skills with Excel, I developed a program for them, and it has really decreased the number of stuff that they're throwing out. In fact, they love it so much, they're thinking of automating it and using it at this Safeway in Rohnert Park. If that one works, we're going to use it at all the other Safeways. And it started with Rick changing what he was saying to himself about himself. Wow.
Steve, you're punctuating very, very well the absolute essence of the narrative of going from one place to another and traveling to a reality that's a different reality. I mean, what beautiful stories, so interesting. And, I'm watching the time. Unfortunately, I have another person in a few minutes I'd like to talk to. But I want to thank you so much. I want to tell everybody that's listening that Steve is going to have a book giveaway at the show notes. So he's going to give away Making Your Mind Magnificent, Flourishing at Any Age. And Steve, I want to thank you very much for coming on board. If in closing you could just give us your website, I'm sure people would be very interested in it. And I think people are going to wind up getting your book anyway. I think what's going to happen for me is that I'm going to list, I've got so many different lists on Core Brain Journal regarding people that we need to pay attention to. And you've certainly helped make that list. There's no question about it.
Wow.
Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chuck.
Tell us where we can go to see you, and then we'll have to wind up. Thank you.
The website is simply StephenRCampbell.com, StevенRCampbell, CampBell.com. The name of the book is Making Your Mind Magnificent. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it on my website.
Steve, thank you so very much. We'll do this again. I think what we need to do is have a metaphoric brain transplant on another level.
That would be fun.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time, my friend.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You have a good one. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.